Hey guys, welcome back to my video. So announcements first as usual. I'm thinking of updating my merch store with more merchandise for the INFP personality, and also because of the quarantine situation, I'm probably going to also update my Patreon. I know I've been pretty lazy. I just wrote like one article and left it there, but I'm thinking of adding a lot more, namely like advice for each personality. So definitely check it out later in the week. I will be adding a lot more content into the Patreon and as well as adding more t-shirt designs into my merch store. I hope you would find something that you really like there. So today's video is a little bit different from what I usually make. I realized that I make a lot of information heavy, kind of a lot of theoretical stuff, which is very understandable given that my personality leads in intuition, and I also have a type 5 wing 4 personality. If you know about Enneagram, I highly recommend that you check out Enneagram if you don't know anything about it, because it's really allows us to learn a lot about ourselves and what we emphasize on. Today I am not going to be giving a very information heavy talk. I'm also not going to be giving any advice, because honestly when it comes to this topic, I don't really think I'm in a good position to give anyone advice. I mean, I don't think I found the one yet, and I don't think I'm close to finding the one, so it is just my own musings. It's going to be personal, and I also have a lot of different, sometimes contradictory, ideas about it. Yes, it is a topic that a lot of INFJs love to talk about, and a lot of INFJs love to think about. Sometimes I also get kind of, I don't know, maybe it's like the TI part of me. I can get pretty cynical as well, so I can have like both sides, like the very idealistic side and also the kind of realistic, almost cynical side. And I'm going to just talk about my views on the topic from the time when I was a kid till now, and how my views have evolved, and kind of the experiences in between. Yeah, I'm just gonna get started from the very beginning. So when I was a kid, I was a very typical, INFJ, very typical Enneagram 4 person. I'm in Enneagram 5 wing 4, but I've been tested for wing 5. I mean, I don't know which one is correct, but currently I'm sticking with the 5 wing 4 because it seems to be that way for now. But yeah, both are pretty strong for me. So as a child, I was a very typical INFJ, typical Enneagram 4. I was very drawn into those, TV dramas, and also even like Disney cartoons about like romance. And I had a very idealistic view of love in general. I just, it's like the whole fairy tale thing, and it's always like some circumstance would happen, some kind of situation. Very dramatic, I know, but it's like the movies or the TV shows where some conflict would happen, and then you two would just be brought together by like heaven's intervention or something, like fate or whatever, and then it just happens, when and I always envision like this enemy become lover situation, because that's like the majority of the plots of a lot of romance films and also dramas, or like it's just some kind of misunderstanding and then it got resolved, and then you guys just realize that you really like each other. And yeah, I didn't really read too much into it, because like I said, I was a kid back then, and I just kind of envisioned this very idealistic version according to the dramas, and I didn't really think about like other factors like the environments, or like the personalities of the characters. I just thought like, oh, it's just gonna happen so naturally, because of some kind of conflict, they would just magically get to know each other, and then it would develop through many trials and errors. They would just be married or something, and people don't really show like what happens after marriage. So there's just no other thoughts beyond marriage. I just think, okay, great, they're married, and then it's like best thing ever. I never really thought about other things that could happen to separate them. I had this really very idealistic view of love, like everyone would just meet the one by chance, and it just happens randomly. Like, could be any kind of serendipitous encounter, and like in real life, and it just develops, and no frustrations, it just naturally unfolds. That's the way that it should be, actually. But real life is not really that simple. When I got older, I think when I was a teenager, I definitely became even more of a hopeless romantic type of situation, and it was almost like a very unrealistic view of the whole thing. Teenagers tend to do that, envision someone coming along and almost like saving you, or like seeing you among the crowd kind of thing. And the reason why I say it was unhealthy was because at that time I was actually a very shy person, especially when it comes to like people of the opposite sex. And now that I look back, I actually had a lot of crushes, and the reason why I had those crushes wasn't really because I really liked all of them, even though that could be a reason. But I think it was almost more of because I was probably just feeling lonely and wanted to kind of have all this, nice ideals of love or whatever fantasies to kind of make my life more exciting. So it's not necessarily that I like all of them that much, or that I definitely have a lot of love to give, even though that could also be the reason. But I definitely felt like there was some kind of other reasons, especially after I learned about like things like codependency, and also about like self-esteem and confidence. So back then when I was a teenager, I didn't have a lot of confidence. I probably was at the lowest point of my confidence when I was like 14 or 15. And that was the time when I actually wanted a partner immediately. And it's like defining to me in terms of how I feel about myself. Like I felt very envious of people who would have a partner, and it's like it's definitely not healthy, because it wasn't coming from a place of I'm happy with the way I am, and let's find a partner to enjoy life together. It was more like there is something missing, or I was just feeling like, oh, everyone else is talking about this, or everyone else is like finding someone, so I should too. It was like almost like a trend back then. And also there's so many dramas that cater to teenage fantasies, that it was just not really something that was a natural thing. It was more like I was seeking it. And yeah, I just felt like I wasn't very confident back then, like I said, because of many reasons. Firstly, I felt like I didn't really have a lot of friends that I could really talk about things that I like to talk about with. And I know I covered that in my previous video about growing up as an INFJ in Asia. I didn't really know back then about diversity, and how people are different, and how different personalities can actually help to contribute something to the world and stuff like that. So I think I was kind of using the romance thing as a crutch at that point, because I felt like, oh, if someone could appreciate me, then it could kind of show me that I am so valuable, and it kind of gives me the value that I am seeking within. Very cliche stuff, but definitely that was the time where I was the most in need. And of course, when you're in need of something, it usually doesn't come to you in the best way. And then I came to realize that when you think about love, it's not really as simple as just meeting someone and like you just chill and ride up to the sunset. It's also about yourself, like your relationship with yourself. And that was something that I became very, very aware of when I reached my 20s. And I started noticing people's relationships around me, and how once you get to know about this relationship with yourself and how you relate with others, you get to notice a lot of things that are going on around you. And what I noticed, that's why it kind of brought the cynical part of me out, is that a lot of relationships that I used to see as, just two people dating or two people liking each other, it's really not that simple, because I see a lot of abuse. I see a lot of codependency, and this is not just me saying it. It's like I know the people involved personally, and I can see that it's not healthy. Especially the amount of suffering that can happen within a relationship. When I talk to the people involved, or sometimes it could be like my close friends, like if the guy isn't treating them well, or it could be the other way around as well. It just has a lot of other dynamics within it that you don't really see in those like TV shows and in those Disney films, where you just expect that they are both healthy individuals. Like you just assume that they are true for each other, they have like genuine feelings for each other and so on. But when I realized that there's actually a lot of this, unhealthy relationships going on, I realized that a lot of the so-called love that people talk about is actually not real. This is just my opinion. I feel like it's not real because people are kind of seeking something that they are unable to provide for themselves. And so it doesn't mean that the feelings that they have for the person is not real, but it just means that, once these people get into a relationship, it tends to just result in very bad like developments, because either side couldn't really give the other what they need. And especially when it comes to like downright abusive dynamics, in those dynamics I can tell that there wasn't really any love involved. It was just kind of an illusion. It was like one of them could be a narcissist or some other kind of condition, and was really just wanting to take things from the other. And it's also not real love from the other, because the other person is just giving away a lot of things and not expecting something in return, and it's because of codependency. So the reason that the victim, or whatever term you want to use, cannot leave the relationship is because he or she is unable to really let go of like this attachment. So it's like you are relying on the person to fulfill your own void or something. And to me, that's not real love either, because love shouldn't be about taking something from someone, or like trying to use that person to fill a void. Otherwise, like, you can't survive on your own. I feel like that's just not love. And that's when I got into the more cynical view of love, where I realized that, really, when I look around me, I don't think I know of a lot of relationships that are genuine in nature, because a lot of them, like I said, has this not so great dynamics, and it really doesn't really come from a genuine sense of appreciation for each other, but it comes from like a place of need, and how, almost like, oh, without this person I feel like I'm not secure, or without this person I feel like I cannot convince myself that I am worthy. That just kind of puts me off, from this love subject. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a break from this, because it's really, for me, it's really exhausting if I were to get into this dynamics with someone. And I definitely don't want to be like the one who is taking everything from someone, and I don't want to be the one who is giving things away either. Like, I want it to be an equal, dynamic. And I also want to be careful that I don't fall into this cycle. So that's when I started looking at a lot of personal development stuff. I looked into a lot of like, advice on dating. And then I found out that a lot of the advice on dating on like websites and even on YouTube, I don't really agree with either, because I noticed that a lot of the advice tend to focus on like strategies, like, oh, how do you attract someone, like, oh, maybe you just don't reply them for a while, and then I don't know, maybe like you don't want to seem too eager and so on. And I understand it from like a logical point of view. I think yes, when it comes to dating, there is an amount of emotional intelligence involved. Like you can't just come up to a random stranger, for example, and say like, oh my god, I love you, you are this and that. Like obviously you're gonna creep that person out, right? Like even if it's a love at first sight situation, you don't just go up to a stranger and start confessing, or like say whatever that you truly think about, because that can really scare someone away. And I understand that, because as a person, we do tend to be put off by that, especially if you don't really know that person that well. So emotional intelligence is definitely important. But at the same time, it's like, if you are only relying on these strategies to attract someone, and you are like heavily reliant on, oh my god, whenever this happens, I'm going to take a step backwards, and then whenever this happens, I'm going to take this step forward, and then you have so much like stress just thinking about, okay, what do I do um, in like whatever situation, and one wrong step and that person can leave you. I feel like in that case, then it's not real love either. If something like a relationship with someone requires so much effort, like whenever you do a step wrong, that person can just lose interest and leave, then my opinion is that, well, the interest wasn't that strong to begin with. Because I'm a lot more forgiving towards people whom I'm genuinely attracted to, compared to people that I'm like lukewarm about. You know what I mean? So, like, if you worry about, oh my god, one step wrong and that person can cut off all ties with me, I feel like, okay, then maybe the person is just not really that interested in you from the start. I'm not saying that you should be completely ignoring like all emotional intelligence advice, because again, that is a part of who we are. Like human nature wise, we do tend to have more approval for certain behaviors, and there is like such thing as tact. I do believe that. I don't think you should say very tactless things to your partner and expect them to love you nonetheless. But I also don't think it should be like perpetual strategy, like, oh my god, I'm fighting this war. I just feel like it should be more natural. I feel like when people have a very high sense of self-esteem or self-love, a lot of things just come naturally to them. Like if someone is not pursuing them, or if someone is not showing them interest, I think it's just natural for things to fade out. I don't think there is really a need for this whole like war zone strategizing going on. It's just, it should be more like gut feeling, intuition based situation. And another subject that I think about when it comes to this subject of love is this idea of delusions. And I know I've talked about it as an INFJ, especially in IDOMs. We do tend to have like an imaginative version of someone, and I don't know if I told you a story like that before. I don't think so, but for the longest time, I thought that I really liked this one person, and that was many years back. And I was pretty young then, so, pretty delusional and naive and so on. And I really thought that he had like all the traits that I wanted in someone, especially the important traits. And in order for me to like love someone, I have to be both physically and emotionally attracted to that person. So it means that it has to be like a combination of physical and personality attraction. And obviously, like physical traits are subjective, but for me, it cannot be like only one thing or the other. It has to be like a combination. And I thought that I was really attracted to that person in both, physically and also in personality wise. I was really into his passions, like his dreams and like goals in life and so on. And then years later, I just totally saw a different side to him, and I was very shocked that he wasn't really who I thought he was. And for the longest time, I thought that he was this like very passion-driven person. But it turned out that he was actually a lot more practical than I thought he was. And I don't know why. I never saw like the practical side of him when we were interacting, but for some reason, like he was actually a lot more practical. And the kind of jobs that he would go for right now is just, I was very put off by that because I am drawn to more creative and passionate people rather than people who are very practical. And that's not to say practical people have anything wrong. It's just my preference for people. I don't really tend to admire people who just go into a job for money, you know what I mean? Or are like, okay, I just want this job because it pays me a lot and gives me all the status. Like I'm not that attracted to this type of personality, and I never thought that he was of that personality. I thought he was more creative and driven about his dreams, but it turned out that he wasn't that really that passionate about his dreams, and he just went to do something really practical and monotonous, and he was fine with that. So then I wasn't attracted to him anymore. But for the longest time, I had an idea about him that I realized isn't really aligned with reality, and I had no idea why I thought about him that way. That was so off, because usually I thought I had pretty good intuition about people, and he did have, evidence of those passion and creativity that I thought was a huge part of him, but it turned out not really. So from this story, I just wanted to say, like, sometimes it's also really hard for me to tell whether our feelings for someone is real or not, or whether how we see someone is real or not, because we tend to have like this rose-tinted vision when it comes to our crushes or people we like, and people can change. People can change so much within like a few years, and that's why breakup happens, because a lot of times it's like we may just drift apart because we don't end up having like the same goals, the same dreams. And that's something that also confuses me about love. It's like, how do you know when it's real? Maybe it's just me overthinking, honestly, because I'm a type 5. But really, I don't know when it can be considered real or not. And sometimes, sure, we just have to go with the flow, I guess. And marriage is even a scarier thing, because you have to be set. You have to choose one person and hopefully not end up in divorce, and that is like a really huge investment. So I'll be very careful about that. Like, I'm not gonna jump into a marriage anytime soon. But yeah, these are just some of my thoughts about love. I know it's very scattered, it's very scrambled. Sorry about that. But just some things for you to think about, like, is infatuation a form of love? Do we all have certain ideas about people that are probably mistaken because people have so many sides to them? And it's hard to tell sometimes, like, do I really like the real you, or is it just codependency, or is it more of, like several years down the road, we are actually not that similar. So I care about, having certain values that are similar to me, and having like certain things that we both view as important. That's what I am attracted to naturally. I'm attracted to people who are also creative and passionate and like want to live life to the fullest, things like that. But sometimes it's hard to tell, sometimes people change, things change, and so on. So really, love is like a very tricky subject for me. And I don't know if any one of you can like maybe share your experience, if you have like found the one, or you realize that you actually may have been mistaken as well when you thought you have found someone. I mean, things happen all the time, right? You see a lot of like marriages every day. You also see a lot of separations. I mean, not to be like all gloom and doom, but this is reality. Like, sometimes people can think they are soulmates, and then it end up not really being the case. And sometimes it's the opposite, right? You think you are not meant to be, but actually you are. So I don't know. I'm just very confused over the whole thing. And I also want to know your type and your views on like this whole subject. And remember to like and subscribe and share if you like the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.